Psychedelics can reveal something about the mind that can't be revealed otherwise.
What's number one?
Alcohol.
Oh, alcohol's the most addictive.
Yeah.
It's one of the deepest inner experience, or I don't know how to put it, more like spiritual or deepest experience in my life.
And then I realized that, wow, instead of 3 weeks, ketamine can alleviate those symptoms in 4 hours.
And let's go to to Paris and have fun. This is not what the psychedelic is about.
Well, hi there. Welcome to episode 365 of Roqe. I'm Jian. And dear fellow humans of Iranian descent, maybe it's time we finally accept therapy. And the taboo and the stigma, embrace the idea that help is actually something to seek, that needing counseling doesn't mean you're weak. Maybe it's time to finally accept therapy. Now, to be clear, we Iranians don't do therapy. I mean, some of us do and have for years, but generally Iranians don't do therapy, or at least we haven't traditionally. We'll sit at the dinner table and dissect world affairs and quote Hafez and joke about Tahchin and Taruf and traffic in Tehran or Toronto. We'll share food, memories, and opinions, but not so much feelings, not trauma, not vulnerability. Those things we're told are best kept behind closed doors, whispered maybe to a cousin, hidden behind a smile. Therapy is for crazy people, we've heard. Or worse, it's a sign of weakness, a betrayal of family pride, an admission that something is broken, and God forbid anyone in our circle should be broken. In a conversation with a dear Iranian friend on the weekend, someone who is going through a rough patch, I suggested counseling or therapy or even seeing a psychologist, only to find he was apparently genuinely offended by the suggestion. To many in the West, this may seem bizarre or super antiquated, but for many, it's a cultural reality. Dear fellow Iranians, it's time we finally accept therapy. There are deep-rooted reasons for a stigma. In traditional Iranian culture, like in many collectivist societies, family honor often supersedes individual struggle. Mental health issues have historically been associated with shame, and public vulnerability can be perceived as inviting judgment or worse, gossip. In the Islamic Republic, mental illness has often been treated as a private matter, discouraged from being aired out loud or in public institutions. In a 2011 study by psychologists Roqe and Anisa Deghani, it was noted that many Iranians avoid seeking help due to fear of being labeled divune, literally crazy, a term that still carries serious social consequences. There's more. A study published in the Iranian Journal of Psychiatry discussed how many families of Persian descent expect emotional resilience to come through endurance, not expression. That suffering is noble, but talking about it is indulgent. So we bottle it up, we wear our best clothes, and we keep calm and carry centuries of unspoken grief. And yet, if any people are in need of healing, it might be us, Iranians, especially those in the diaspora who have endured rupture after rupture, generation after generation. The Islamic Revolution wasn't just a political coup, it was a cultural earthquake. Millions were displaced, scattered across the globe, often overnight. Lives upended, identities rewritten, and since then, war, repression, exile, loss, generational silence, all of it embedded, inherited. We carry it in our bones, even if we seldom speak of it. We mask it with perfectionism, with success, with surface-level joy, but inside, many are struggling, quietly, privately, alone. Maybe it's time to finally accept therapy. And so before we talk about the new tools, as we will on this show today, the innovative treatments, the science of psychedelics, the promise of ayahuasca or psilocybin, maybe we have to first confront an older truth. We need to give ourselves permission to work on mental health. And that begins with accepting therapy not as a stigma, but as a sanctuary. Let's try it this way. We need to normalize asking for help. We need to make room for the language of feelings, not just philosophy and poetry. And we need to understand that trauma doesn't disappear just because we're good at pretending it doesn't exist. Even the strongest souls need somewhere to lay their sorrow. Let's seek the help and not defer to tomorrow. All right. We have a big new edition of Roqe coming your way. Why psychedelics can help your mental health. I'll be joined by Anisa Deghani and Dr. Mohammad Barzegari. Let's do this. Take your mushrooms to stay alive. This is Roqe, episode 365. It's March 27, 2025. This is Roqe. Hi there. Welcome to episode 365 of Roqe. I'm Jian Gomeshi. Hello to you from Toronto. Salam Dustan Aziz. Duru Basham. I hope you're doing well wherever you are tuning in from around the world. How psychedelics can help our mental health. Juicy topic. It's something that you might be seeing everywhere all of a sudden. People are talking about this, how magic mushrooms or ketamine or different psilocybins can help with mental health. You may be hearing a lot about this new, somewhat miraculous way to cure anxiety, trauma, depression, ADHD. And the cures are coming from non-traditional medicines, right? That include magic mushrooms and psychedelics. Could it be the same drugs that were considered the domain of rock and roll trips and hallucinating highs are actually the future of healthcare in the realm of psychology? We want to discuss that. And it's a really profound and powerful new area for mental health. So we're going to get to that. Before we get there, happy Nowruz again to all of you. Nowruz Piruz, Nowruz Mubarak, Aghay Roham, Super P, the whole Roqe team. Sad Salmeen Salha. You can watch our full Nowruz roundtable from last week on our YouTube channel. I should mention that. Remember that Roqe, if you're relatively new to us, appears on a number of different platforms in different ways. So you can watch the show on YouTube, as some of you may be doing, at Roqe Media. Sometimes we put up clips as well on Instagram, etc., and Telegram. Or you can listen to it as an audio podcast, which is how we started on Spotify or Apple or SoundCloud or CastBox or what am I missing? All of those platforms. So remember our podcast platforms. You can subscribe on audio or video on any of the platforms. And if you haven't already subscribed, or if you don't make it a habit of doing so, please do, because that's our bread and butter to have you as part of our audience. All right, let's get to this topic of psychedelics and mental health. And our first guest today is a researcher. And our first guest today is a researcher examining the role of psychedelics in mental health. Anisa Deghani has conducted research at Harvard University Medical Center and continues to explore the subject from her current base in Amsterdam. With a deep interest in alternative therapies, she brings both scientific insight and global perspective to discussions on mental health. She's also someone who has had personal experience when it comes to psychedelics and her own mental health, and can attest to their power and their properties and their proficiency in therapy. In addition to her research, Anisa has published several books from inside and outside of Iran. And right now, Anisa Deghani joins us from Rotterdam, Holland. Hello.
Hello. It's very good to be with you.
It's very nice to have you on the show. And this topic, which would have seemed progressive and cutting edge like 6 months ago or a year ago, but now it seems like it's everywhere. Everyone is suddenly talking about psychedelics and mental health and anxiety and depression and ADHD, and how psychedelics could be the big fix for it. Even Oprah is doing a special on it now. What do you think is in the water around the world that all of a sudden this has become the topic that everyone wants to talk about?
Well, that's a good question, Jian. I really don't know, but yes, that's kind of brand and hot topic to discuss in all kind of media, scientific context or social media, both. Maybe because if I just want to concentrate, the main reason, maybe it's that psychedelics seem to give people access to a better version of self, and but this is not something new, because psychedelics, as the word implies. It consists of two parts, so it's a Greek word, and it consists of psyche, which means soul, and mind, and delix, which means to reveal. And it's like it's old. It's an old story. It's being used as a substance in ritual, in specific ceremonies for healing, for religious rituals all over the world, in Amazon, specifically Amazon, in shamanism, in German tribes, even in Middle East. And there is a long centuries and centuries of history around it. But there hasn't been that much of science and research about it. Actually, the Timothy Leary, which was a clinical psychologist, started to do research in Harvard University in the 60s, and after a personal experience with magic mushroom in Mexico that changed his life and his view of life. And he came back to Harvard and established the psychedelic project, research project. And but he was accused and he was arrested, I think, more than 30 times. And some people hated him, some people adored him. And then there was this Cold War on drugs, and then it was banned. And then there were a lot of scandals about it, and it was just like buried for many reasons. Whereas at the same time, a lot of drugs which were addictive, like alcohol, like cigarette, they were legal,
of course, yeah,
legally distributed, but psychedelics become illegal. And recently, some scientists started to doubt that. So the first ones, so all it came from research that's about the default mode network that Marcus Rachel started, and showed that this part of the brain is actually a part of the brain, or like the cortex of the human brain has separate. I don't know how much technical.
Let me get to that. Let me get to that. I mean, this was a very comprehensive answer to why is this hot right now. I appreciate it. Let me try and break down some of what you said. First of all, when we talk about psychedelics, it seems to me that it's a catch-all term, but surely there's a significant difference between, say, mushrooms and ketamine and MDMA and LSD, and So I mean, if you're talking about psychedelic-assisted therapy, you may not necessarily be talking about LSD, right?
Well, psychedelic-assisted therapy is a term that has been established recently because of the research that has been done in the therapeutic settings of the universities and clinics. So psychedelic-assisted therapy is a term introduced to literature by the researchers that have been published.
But how do we know what we're talking about? How do we know if we're talking about mushrooms, or what are we talking about, or ketamine, when we're talking about psychedelics?
Yeah, so this psychedelic assisted therapy includes some psychedelics that there are some papers and data out there about them. The most important psychedelic molecule is psilocybin. So the psychedelics that contain psilocybin are different kinds, species of mushrooms, like golden teacher, magic mushroom, generally called magic mushroom, and DMT, which is also like in ayahuasca, in 5-MeO-DMT. Another one is mescaline, which is present in different kind of cacti. The most known is peyote. And also LSD, which is the human-made form of psilocybin. So these are the psychedelics that there are lot of researchers on them, and the data is out there. So these researchers that I mentioned is both the researchers preclinical, so on animal models about the neurobiology and mechanism, and also then clinical trials, phase 1, phase 2, and recently phase 3 of psilocybin clinical trial on human beings for general anxiety disorder and for resistant depression, which over 80% were successful. Also, other types of challenges, mental health challenges, like OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, like anorexia, or other kind of disease like pain, chronic pain. So these are psychedelics that we're talking about. And I just want to make it bold, as I always do, that psychedelics are different, distinguished, different from drugs. So psychedelics work on serotonergic pathways, but drugs like cocaine, like cigarettes, like street drugs, they are not psychedelic. They boost the dopamine release and they work on addictive and pleasure and dopamine system. So there is a distinctive
So is it to say that
bold line.
Is it to say that psychedelics are not addictive at all?
No, psychedelics are not addictive. Why? Because there is a mechanism behind them. Psychedelics, that's why they are called psychedelics, because they work on the serotonin release, a serotonin 5-HT2A receptor, which is recently published by Professor Kawat Harris and the group, California University. So serotonin 5-HT2 receptor is a receptor for serotonin that psilocybin, or the psilocin, the active form of psilocybin that passes the blood-brain barrier, attached to this receptor, and it is present in specific areas of the cortex, not all over the cortex. That's why it has a specific function compared to SSRI, serotonin reuptake inhibitors, that has a very general effect and a lot of side effects. So serotonin, because it acts through the serotonergic neuron, is not addictive, because dopaminergic neuron, which release dopamine, if we want to compare the mechanism, like simply why it's not addictive, take like cocaine or a drug which boosts the dopamine release. Dopaminergic neuron is an excitatory neuron. So it constantly excites the postsynaptic neuron, the neuron after it. And this excitation cause eventually to the death of the neuron after it. And the neuron after it, which is called postsynaptic neuron, to survive, it down-regulates the amount of receptor for dopamine. And then for the same effect, same pleasure, same reward, we need more dopamine to be released because the receptors are down-regulated. And this
funny.
is addiction.
When you were just saying that, that's exactly what I was just thinking. I was thinking, wouldn't part of it be like, so if I do mushrooms recreationally, let's take it out of the assisted, but although it will be related at some point, obviously, if I do mushrooms every 2 or 3 days, or even every weekend, right, recreationally, won't I, exactly what I was going to ask you, won't I need more to feel more after a while? Won't I be craving a heavier dose?
Very good question, Jian. First of all, mushroom, we cannot do mushroom for recreational, because we get to some challenging trip that is not, there's no pleasure about that. There is no reward about that. Mushroom is it keeps you, if you do it recreationally, it takes you to some challenging, difficult somatic and mental situation that is not meant to be there, because mushroom is very strong psychedelic if you take it on high dose, which is called heroic dose, and it needed to be in a specific appropriate setting and mindset.
So as much of an advocate you are as a researcher in terms of the therapy side of it, you don't believe people should be doing this at a cottage on Friday night in Northern Ontario?
Not at all. Not at all. No. There is. I insist on this, that the mushroom, the magic mushroom, the people that take it and go to forest or open area and nothing is predictable there. It's with the doses that they have no clue about the doses, how much they are eating of the dried mushroom, and then a lot of really dangerous stuff can happen for that person that is doing that. Because while you're going to that state of altered consciousness, you cannot control anything at that moment. And you might go to very difficult, horrible paths that you cannot control. That's why you need to do that with a seater, with a facilitator in an appropriate setting. And there is no way to do that recreationally. It's not just, not something for fun.
And Anisa, is that true for all the psychedelics that you're talking about? Or are you, I mean, just to clarify the point, or is that particularly about mushrooms you're talking about? Would you say the same thing for any of the other psychedelics we've talked about?
Yeah, for all the psychedelics. For all the psychedelics, there is no fun thing about them, because it might take you, because it takes the control out of you, because it decreases the activity of default mode network. And this is science. This is a fact that is proven till now in last decade. So when the default mode network is down, the connection between the amygdala, the center for fear and anxiety, the connection and fight or flight response, the connection between many parts of the brain are so different and changed that you don't want to go to that condition for recreation, but you want to go to that condition to learn something from that experience. This is the
but a lot of people do. A lot of people
healing.
do. A lot of people do want to go to that place recreationally. I mean, there's a, as you know, there's a romance around it too for certain artistic types. I mean, forget about crazy teenagers doing whatever, but so, where it's like, if I do mushrooms, I'll be more creative. I mean, having
Jian, just one thing is to just mention that too. For the first and second, or for the first times, you need to do it with somebody that has experience and knows, has awareness about what is in hand. But later, when you have enough experience about that, you can do psychedelic to a certain amount of dose and certain type of psychedelic alone when you have enough knowledge and experience about that. And that's something else. But I see people just do it like for recreation festivals, or just let's do it this weekend to have fun, and let's go to to forests and have fun. This is not what the psychedelic is about. This is something else. This is another story.
Yeah. In my experience, it can definitely lead to some really, really shitty poetry that I write with the influence of mushrooms. That seems great at the moment, but then the next day doesn't seem is not very impressive.
Well, it caused creativity. That's one of the magic consequence of psychedelic, because it increases the connectivity between all parts of your brain, and the perceptual blending is one of the outcome of psychedelic experience. But then you need to do the integration. Integration is as important as psychedelic experience itself. And all these papers or researchers that have been published, and they are there, they mentioned that it's like integration of talk therapy or writing or sharing your experience with an expert in that field is as important as what you experienced with psychedelic. Then you realize, okay, this is healing and this is therapeutic. This is what we are talking about, psychedelic-assisted therapy.
Just back to that opening question around the excitement around this this type of therapy now. I suspect that you would, I mean, when we talk about perception and reality, there is the beginnings of the scientific research. You're talking people like you who are teaching us about this stuff, and some who are swearing by it, and therapists who are beginning to incorporate this into their work, etc. And then there's some stuff happening in social media that feels like hype, that is as if psychedelics are the panacea for everything. It's going to fix, all your problems. I'm assuming the reality lies somewhere in between, yes?
That's true. So like everything else, it has two faces. faces. It has two sides. It can be positive. It can be used. It can be abused. In social media, one cannot unfollow social media, but there are lots of hot topics there, including psychedelics, and people talk about psychedelics in different contexts. What I am interested in is psychedelic, and that's why I do have like first-hand experiences with most of them. I did them because I needed to know what is there as a first-hand experience, because I needed to know, okay, this is the literature, this is the scientific literature, this is what people believe, okay, what is my own experience? But I never did it like, just let's do this without any guidance or just ignorant to what I'm eating, I'm using, and where I am. And I think the social media is like, could be a not the best platform to advocate about psychedelics. So one needs to go and read the researchers, listen to the right podcast, the scientific one, and also gain the experience and knowledge from the people that they are doing it for years and years, and they are like wise and knowledgeable facilitators, shamans, and real psychologists, not the psychology by label, but the real psychologists. And they are people free from ego, and they are not talking about this all the time in social media.
Why and how did you come to this? I mean, you're this woman who's a writer, who's a scientist from Iran. You come and you're doing all this work at Harvard. How did you enter into the field of psychedelics yourself?
Well, I came to the Netherlands and I started doing research on migraine. And then one of the research was the effect of different ratios of CBD, THC, which are the ingredients in marijuana, weed. And the THC is the psychoactive component. So the different ratio of THC, CBD, the effect on pain mechanism. I started with that, but then I had a friend, and because of very difficulties and trauma that we Iranian, or as an Iranian experience, so I also experienced as an Iranian, a Baha'i in Iran, in prison, all those stuff. So he recommended to do MDMA assisted therapy to encounter the trauma and just unblock. And that was like a miracle experience for me. That was my first experience with MDMA, which is not really a psychedelic. It's something between psychedelic and drug, because it works on dopamine and serotonin at the same time. But it's one of the mildest assistant for therapeutic, and now it's been approved in some countries and it's being debated in Netherlands for PTSD treatment. But then I also experienced ayahuasca after that, and that was really like as all the people experiencing it said, that's one of the deepest inner experience, or I don't know how to put it in more like spiritual or deepest experience in my life, because I don't want to talk about it now, but I experienced them myself to know how I can relate what is subjective out there, and people talk about it, and there's literature and research. As a scientist, I have to ask questions about them, to my own experience as a real authentic experience.
But this is why I'm glad to have you on the show, because it's I can ask you a question that I was going to ask in an academic sense, but you can answer it both academically based on your research and personally in terms of your own experience and your own mental health. And so when they talk about that transformative experience with psychedelics, you hear that, whether it's ayahuasca or it can be mushrooms, etc., and even in an assisted setting, what is happening that would then, how do we tie that to the healing process? What is the transformative experience doing that helps you cope with being imprisoned as a Baha'i in Iran? If you can do this in a way that is accessible to those of us who might not understand some of the terms, what exactly is happening there?
Oh, well, just it's a lot that I can talk about this. What happens in the brain during the psychedelic experience? I have this whole workshop about this, so it's really hard to summarize it. But what is the most important thing is that psychedelics can reveal something about the mind that can't be revealed otherwise. And maybe because that part of the mind is masked, or it's not in the awareness threshold, it's not coming to the awareness threshold. You know, a lot of information we store in our brain and body, but it's not coming, it doesn't come to the awareness, it doesn't pass the awareness threshold. It's subconscious, it's masked. So, and that's the block or the root of a lot of unhealthy patterns that we have in our life, including the relationships, the work relationships, the partner relationship, or relationship to ourselves, to nature, to everything. And when psychedelic, the brain, when puts your brain on that global connectivity, it's called scientifically. So brain tends to work in different modules, like auditory module tend to relate to each other separately than visual, but then when we are on psychedelic, brain become like a whole one single module. So there is a whole increase in connectivity and heightened consciousness to the level that the default mode network, which is responsible for judgment, fears, and ego, is kind of shut down and decrease in activity. And then the other regions of the brain have the chance to reconnect to each other through the specific mechanism of psilocybin effect on serotonin 5-H2A receptor. This is super important for the whole healing process.
You had me until the end there. You had me until the end. Explain the last part. Yeah, I lost you in some of those terms there.
So psilocybin, which is the psychedelic molecule in magic mushroom, and a lot of like also DMT acts like the same receptor. They all act through the 5-H2A receptor, which is serotonin 2A receptor. And this serotonin 2A receptor place is on specific neurons called pyramidal neurons, and a specific part of these neurons, which is called apical dendrites. And the whole anatomy of these neurons and the mechanism of the effect of psilocybin makes it specific without the side effect, without the addictive, in a setting, in the appropriate controlled setting and mindset. Mindset also is very important for all these healing effects. And I just say this, which is very important. What happens when brain works as a module? So all the sensory inputs, visual, auditory, emotions, your memories, they all kind of blend to each other, perceptual blending. And you can rewire your narrative of your life, your trauma, your block again without the presence of the agency of, ego and judgment and fear, because that's already shut down.
Yeah.
So, and you do the work alone. It's an inner journey. That's why it's called a journey, because that's like a 7, 8, 10 hour of a journey, which your mind, your body is doing this work to heal itself. That's the magic about your body and your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I talked a lot because it's really exciting when I talk about the mechanism of that.
I appreciate it. I appreciate that you're explaining exactly what's happening. Well, I like the the metaphor, and maybe it's not even a metaphor, it's a reality of unlocking. It's unlocking something that has been blocking us in our past that creates a
Yeah,
pattern of behavior. So I get triggered by something, or I'm sad, or I can't express myself, or whatever, because there's something from my past that I need to unlock. And when I think about traditional therapy, I suppose, like talk therapy, etc., which I have a lot of experience with, going to therapists. You're always searching for, you're wanting to get to that pinnacle, which is going to unlock something. If you think, the metaphor is Robin Williams and Matt Damon and Good Will Hunting, and they're going through these therapy sessions to get to the point where he can have this breakthrough, And sometimes you do.
yeah,
Sometimes you can get there in that kind of therapy. When you get there, it's based on months or weeks or maybe years of talking, and
exactly.
if
Yeah.
this is happening because you're in one session doing psychedelic or ayahuasca or something like that, are you I don't know how to phrase this, but are you learning the same? Are you and is the unlocking going to have the same lasting effects as it would be if I were to sit with you week after week in therapy sessions,
That's a
working through
very
this?
good question.
All right. Today's edition of Roqe is brought to you in part by Apadana Entertainment, one of our premier promotion companies for Iranian events and concerts here in Canada. Apadana are bringing Siavash Ghomeshi to Toronto and Vancouver this June. There are still tickets available for the Toronto show. You want to get them soon. Before that, on April 19th, just 2 or 3 weeks away, Apadana welcome a major concert event here in Toronto featuring Shohreh, Andy, Donya, and Shani. It's at Meridian Hall here in Toronto. You don't want to miss this. April 19th, a big show. Tickets are on sale now at ticketmaster.ca. Andy, Shohreh, and more, all on one night. Ticketmaster.ca.
That's a very good question, Jian, because this is the thing that you said. It's just like a psychedelic, it's like a shortcut that takes you to the peak of the mountain that you have been trying to reach to it with all kind of therapy, but still under the influence of your ego. Sometimes ego is so this sense of agency in us, that I am in control. The ego tells you ego is in control of everything. Actually, it's not. That's a narration. But in psychedelic, it's gone. This sense of agency, ego, is gone. And this rewiring of serotonergic pathway is an anatomical change that happens in your brain. An anatomical change comes with you out of the journey, out of this experience. That's why integration, talk therapy, meditation, being in nature, reflection on the journey and the experience, talking about your journey and experience with experts and with experienced persons. These are integration, and that keeps that anatomical new spines, new rewired neurons keep going on and keep be present. So you feel that bliss and happiness long after like a high dose of psychedelic, like ayahuasca or whatever that you use, but in a setting, of course, with this facilitator and therapist or facilitator or shaman. And this is what Professor Kawat Harris also mentions in all the podcasts that he has, and insists on that this needs to be done in a controlled setting, and then integration is as important
Gotcha.
as the journey to keep that anatomical
It's
change
not just the act.
alive.
It's not just the act. It's not just the one
No,
psychedelic
no.
experience. It's
And
that
that's why it's a paradigm shifting in like treating resistant depression, general anxiety disorder, compared to citalopram in these clinical trials. It has been over 70% success with heroic dose of psilocybin compared to citalopram. It's a huge success for the effect, positive effect. And that's why it's so convincing in psychiatric field that nobody can just doubt these researches that has been done in the last decade.
But except that they would say exactly what you just said. The research has been done in the last decade. So do we have the critical evidence that we would need of a longer period of time to know what the potential prospective long-term effects of doing this, even if it's assisted, even if it's not in a non-addictive way, etc. To know, I mean, can you assure people, and maybe it's a ridiculous exercise, but assure them that if you do ayahuasca 20 times, 10 years down the road, it's not going to have some effect, negative effect?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. If we take the research, we talk about the research context of research and science. Well, it's just like a decade, as I said, like a bit more than a decade that these researchers have. But this last decade, there was no relapse. So these positive effects have been both rapid and enduring. So there were not any relapse in this decade at least. But in another point of view, people, I mean, human being like these people in Latin America and Peru, or in a lot different parts of the world, they have been doing this traditionally and in spiritual or religious ceremonies for years and years and years, and they are in such an authentic relation to themselves and to nature. If you go there and spend time with them and talk to them, you will notify that how different is the modern person with that inflated ego. And actually, too, just in parentheses, drugs like cocaine, they inflate the ego.
Yes.
But psychedelic just dissolves the ego. So it's just the opposite.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's personally, not that it's relevant necessarily, but I'm pretty zero tolerance when it comes to something like cocaine, having been around it so much in my life and seen nothing but negative effects on people. I always say, find me the person the next day who's a better person because they did cocaine the night before, you know? Whereas I have a very different philosophy around psychedelics, exactly for the reasons you're saying. But it does feel kind of undiscovered still, and because everything is so new and happening so fast, my skeptical mind says how are you and people like you going to try to avoid this from this going down a path of commercialization that can mess with what is pure about it, what is healing about it, whether it's big pharma or anybody who sees an opportunity now. Where are you at with
That's
that
true.
when it comes to psychedelics?
Well, that's completely true. That's my fear too, because if pharmaceutical companies just start to monopoly the psychedelic assisted therapy or the like whatever related to that, and then it become even more expensive than what it is already, because now it's already expensive to having the psychedelic therapy retreat. I think it's more expensive in Canada and USA than Europe, but still very expensive. But your point is, I think, quite accurate about the future and the commercial, making it commercial versus the real healing effect that it's being done years and years in very small and humble settings. So that's something I don't have any answer about that. We are just in the beginning of researches, and it's just quite so new field. It's not just mental challenges that it can be dealt with psychedelic. It's also other disease like cluster headache. Like researchers have been shown that microdosing of psilocybin have effect on ice-pick headache and cluster headache, or anorexia. Professor Kawit Harris has this psychedelic research center in California University that is doing like different kinds of effect on different kinds of disease, including anorexia, and which is still a mental health challenge, but also pain-related disturbances. And recently, for inflammation, for stroke, for I read an article about the dementia, which starts and the comorbidity of it with depression that starts with in hippocamp and a place in hippocamp called dentate gyrus. And these dentate gyrus neurons, they have also receptor serotonin 2A, which is the receptor of psilocybin. And psilocybin has positive effects in the dementia and the depression symptoms in that research is published recently,
Are
also a
there
few years ago.
are there conversations being had in your circles, in scientific circles, in academic circles, about how to deal with the inaccessibility of this in terms of the price? You mentioned it a moment ago, the prohibitive prices of this stuff. When I found out here, at least here in Toronto, if you want to engage in some psychedelic therapy, assisted therapy, it's thousands and thousands of dollars for a session. I mean, it's really expensive stuff. And
Well, that's in USA and I think Canada, maybe in Europe, like in Netherlands, it's like four or three or 400 for an ayahuasca ceremony, I think, for 2 days.
But as you know, sorry, where I was going with it though was the irony being that sometimes those who might need it the most, somebody coming from a marginalized community, somebody feeling particularly alone, somebody who due to their cultural biases are, and we know this as Iranians, are, can't reach out for help in this kind of area, whatever. Those are the people that are going to suffer the most if this is way out of price for them, right?
That's true. So the question you asked, that what is the discussion about the price? We are not even at that stage. We are now like in academia. We are talking about how we can get these substances to start research because it's illegal. That's the irony. That's the funny thing about it. So on the other hand, on one hand, it's like such a huge therapeutic and healing, and it's the researchers are there and convince like we should convince FDA government to make it legal in order to get the substance in the medical setting, in the research setting, to do more research. So that's also a challenge for the researchers to get the substance. Like if we want to do research on ayahuasca, we should give people ayahuasca and like put them in fMRI, like the volunteers, of course, or whatever. But ayahuasca is illegal. So, and the university, if it's a governmental university, doesn't want to do illegal stuff and make some scandals around it. So it's all a challenge. Still in many academic setting, they don't even talk about it. They don't take it seriously, depending on which field you are working on. Maybe in psychology it's a bit better, but in neurology it's just like, oh, don't talk about psychedelics, these are drugs. Like you should just whisper about some kind of research that has been done.
Is that right? That type of prejudice still exists, even with the Oprah specials and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Prejudice is still there, or like I can't say even in the scientific environment, there is ego, there is prejudice, there is everything. I mean, it's not that different if it's not more than other settings.
It's really interesting talking to you. I really appreciate this conversation. I appreciate the work that you're doing and trying to explain this to people and both, as I've said before, from an academic perspective and a personal. If it's okay with you, we end off talking about your personal experience a little bit. Like I haven't even. It was interesting because we booked you as somebody who, as from an academic perspective, to talk about this, and then I learned about your personal story, and it's quite a harrowing one. Just what you've been through as a woman, as a Baha'i coming from Iran, etc. And I'm curious if you can speak to how your work with psychedelics, as you talked about earlier, going into it yourself and seeing almost as a test case, wanting to see how this works, how it has affected you on your journey, and if you can even get into some specifics, what it was in your past that you've dealt with that this process has helped you through.
So a lot happened during my own personal journeys, but depending on what was the psychedelic. So MDMA was a bit more personal, like about a personal block that I had, was a death of a loved one that I had kind of a trauma and block, and it was affecting other stuff. But the ayahuasca journey was like everything was there, like death, birth, conception, memories of being at the conception level, an infant in the, I mean, in the womb of mother, even before that, after death. So it was like a, um, mm, yeah. But the part that was, I mean, when I'm out of the journey and it's like years passed from the first ayahuasca journey that I had, it's been 3 years past. So the thing that stick in my mind, and I always remember the details of the journey. So you never forget the psychedelic trip because it's a serotonergic pathway again. So it sticks in your memory and wiring of your brain. It was about the empathy. So I apparently, me as a person that felt like, okay, I was like a Baha'i in Iran, and from the childhood, we were deprived from everything, the basic primary rights like education, like going to school, having insurance or whatever, passport, and dealing with these kind of traumatic memories were like building up anger and grief or depression, kind of not being able to express that anger to like a governmental agency or something. But it was like an anger or grief, and that was dealt with in my psychedelic journeys beautifully. And I could feel empathy toward myself and all these sufferings and hardships, and the people that induced kind of like inducers, or in my interrogator, or like the people that arrested me, or my family or my friends, or tortured them or whatever. I could feel empathy through their point of view. And that's actually why I decided to publish my novel too, because my novel was about a Baha'i family in Iran, and it was unpublished, it was there, and I couldn't dare to go there even to read it again. But this ayahuasca journey helped me to go through it, edit it, and publish it, and just say, okay, that's part of the common pain and common suffering. We are part of one entity. And if we hurt each other, I mean, I hurt somebody, the other person hurt me, we are doing it to ourselves. So this is like by words, narration, putting words together in this state of consciousness that we are talking. It's a bit like, what are you talking about? Come on.
No, it's
But
actually
when you go to that state of consciousness in a like ayahuasca journey, it's just like a fact, like obvious, like sun in the middle of the sky. How can't you see that?
but if I may, it's actually a beautiful answer, because embedded in what you seem to be saying is the biggest, or one of the biggest takeaways for you, say from the ayahuasca journey, has not been necessarily just the understanding of yourself, but the understanding of others, even those who
Absolutely.
weren't, those who haven't treated you well. That's a beautiful answer. I mean, that's a that alone is enough
Absolutely.
to, yeah.
Yeah.
And you did this with somebody who's assisting you, right?
Yeah, definitely. So for ayahuasca, there are like in everywhere in the world, it has to be like that. If it's not, don't go there. It has to be very strict with surveys. So they send you a survey 1 month ago, what kind of food you eat, disease or mental health challenges, what kind of medication, all this kind of survey, and then a diet, and then you go there, it's controlled, the dose is given to you by facilitator, experienced person, and the setting. Music is such an important item in the journey, which needs to be controlled, the rhythm, the tracks, with different phases of psychedelic journey. That's another story. So everything is related, and everything needs to be appropriate and suitable and controlled by a facilitator or multiple facilitator in my case. So we were like a group of 10 people, and there were like 3 or 4 very experienced facilitators.
Where was it? Where was it?
And therapists.
Where was it?
In Netherlands. I did my ayahuascas in Netherlands.
Okay. I mean, is it, one of the things that's scary about doing, I don't know if it counts, when one time when I did ecstasy, I had, I guess, what would be called a bad trip. It just was a very, very scary, negative experience. What happens when that happens?
Did you do it alone? Did you do it like with an intention in mind? Did you do it in an appropriate light setting, musical setting, and closed environment? Who was with you? All these matter in your journey. So you never want to do a MDMA or ecstasy or mushroom without thinking about set and setting. That's super important. One of my friends did mushroom, and then he went to train and went to Amsterdam and had a horrible journey in the middle of the city. Why on earth you want to do that like this?
Right. Wandering around Amsterdam.
Everything matters. All these questions that I ask you, they matter one by one in your journey. However, you might have all of this as in a therapeutic setting in university. You might have a very challenging trip. That's part of it, because there is a phase which is called ego dissolution. So you are losing control. That's part of the journey. And then if you resist, if your ego doesn't want to lose control, this sense of agency in you that says, I'm in control of everything, which is also in your real life. You want to control everything, and then you can't, and then you become angry, you become depressed. That is losing the sense of control, and that's the anxiety part. Usually in the beginning, the first hour, 2 hours, it's quite normal, even in a therapeutic setting. And if you let go of that, if you surrender to the experience like a pure channel and let your mind do the job, then beautiful, beautiful healing stuff comes for you.
The letting go is definitely for me a challenge sometimes. A final question to you, and I don't know if it's something you can really break down based on our background, ethnic, racial, national, or otherwise. How do you, the Iranian community, what particular challenges have you noticed for Iranians when it comes to psychedelics and mental health? I mean, I'll put it out there by saying, first of all, that even just therapy has been was so taboo for Iranians to talk about having a therapist, as if it's some sort of deficiency if you have one, until very recently. And there's still kind of some of those types of taboos in our culture. Where does this sit for Iranians in your experience? I know you're out there on social media, and oftentimes you're speaking in Persian. You probably get some feedback from inside Iran. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, first of all, therapy is like taboo in many cultures, not just Iran. So I noticed it even in Netherlands, even in USA. So it's like, okay, well, like a taboo, kind of taboo. But I got a lot of feedbacks and questions, compliments, and difficult questions and feedbacks. And also, that's why I started this workshop, scientific workshop about the brain-mind psychedelic. And people from Iran also come and attend, and they ask so precise and up to the point questions about the topic and concept, and that really surprises me. They don't have really access to these psychedelics except maybe magic mushroom, but they are so curious about the effect because most of them have real suffering and traumas, and they really want to deal with that in an authentic way, not escaping to addiction, to like cocaine or alcohol or, a sex or something like just an escape mechanism. But they really want to deal with it. And I'm sure that there will be one day that the Farsi speaking society, or mostly Iranian, they could have access to the right psychedelic in the right setting, because at the moment the settings are not really there. They're not reliable, whatever it's in Iran. There might be very rare uh, locations underground, of course, because that's quite illegal also in Iran. To even talk about it, it's a crime.
I thank you so much for doing this. I hope you'll have an occasion.
My pleasure.
I hope you have an occasion to come to Toronto, come to Canada, do one of your workshops here in the Roqe Hub. It's so it's the tip of the iceberg. We barely scratched the surface. I feel like I could talk to you for days about this, and I'm sure the audience will feel the same way in terms of wanting to hear more. Thank you, merci, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much, Jian.
Khodafez.
Have a nice day. Khodafez.
Today's edition of Roqe is brought to you in part by I Welcome. I Welcome is the one and only Iranian-Canadian company in premium tour, travel, and limo transportation. I Welcome redefines every journey with a modern fleet and professional drivers, ensuring that whether you're enjoying a scenic city tour, traveling for business, or arriving in style at a special event, you experience unmatched comfort and reliability. With I Welcome, your ride becomes a luxurious extension of your lifestyle. I've had the pleasure of riding in one of the luxury cars that Amin and his team at I Welcome have in their fleet. And if you are anywhere in the Greater Toronto Area, you must use them for your travel needs. Hatsman. You find them at iwelcome.ca. Once again, that's iwelcome.ca. All right. Well, you may be hearing a lot these days about new, somewhat miraculous ways to cure anxiety, trauma, depression, ADHD, and the cures are coming from non-traditional medicines that include magic mushrooms and psychedelics. Could it be the same drugs that were considered the domain of rock and roll trips and hallucinating highs are actually the future of healthcare in the realm of mental health and psychology? My featured guest today is a psychotherapist based in Toronto who's been working in the mental health field for several years. Mohammad Barzegari has an interest in innovative approaches to therapy, and he's recently focused on psychedelic-assisted therapy, a topic that is generating a lot of conversation in the mental health world right now. Dr. Mohammad Barzegari joins me in the Roqe Studio. Hello, sir.
Hello, Jian. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to talk about psychedelics and this new word of helping people. I think it would be the future of mental health, and then we all need this.
It is the future of mental health.
Yes.
All right. You seem quite convinced of that.
Yes, because we now live in global mental health crisis. I mean, there was a report came out, I think 5 or 6 years ago, that they estimated the number of people who will be depressed by 2030 will be around 300 million, and by 2023 we had more than 280 millions of depressed people around the world. So the future doesn't
compared to what? How many people were depressed before?
So compared to like less than 150 millions like 10 years ago.
Is that because they weren't being diagnosed, or is that because people have just become more depressed?
Both, actually.
Right. And is this all about the iPhone and the new online world? I mean, is what do you attribute this dramatic rise in depression and anxiety to?
That could be part of it, like being online or ruminating a lot, or being on social media and comparing yourself with other people, especially for young people, especially for young female population, but not for everyone. There's more than that. There are more reasons that they contribute to make people depressed nowadays.
Like what?
Economic crisis, and people that they're not necessarily receiving enough care that they need. Even when it comes to mental health services, I mean, a lot of hospitals and organizations around the world, including North America, they have people the people that they're dealing with suicide or depression or substance use disorder. They have them for a week, and then because they don't have enough budget or they don't have enough support, they just let them go. and they're by their own.
Right. At the same time, it's definitely less taboo to talk about having anxiety or having depression. It used to be something that nobody would talk about, even in the West. I mean, Iranians definitely have trouble still saying that they're going to a therapist or something. We've talked about that on this program before. But more people certainly are talking about it. So more awareness means more people are coming forward. So it's hard to know exactly how many people were depressed and anxious before because we wouldn't say anything, right?
Right. Yeah, that's true. I mean, now, luckily we have enough psychologists and psychotherapists and enough programs to diagnose people and even increasing awareness regarding mental health in general. But there's also a but that people are not actively working in terms of like improving their mental health. Now people are they have to be focused on different things in life. They don't have enough time to rest. Some of them, they're workaholic. Some of them, they're just constantly comparing themselves with other people. They're doing a bunch of other things that they're not necessarily good for their mental health. But if you compare it with our like older generations, they were physically active all the time. They were spending a lot of time outside. They had their own morning sunlight exposure. They were walking outside. They would talk to people. They weren't sitting at home spending a lot of time on Netflix or like just scrolling down and comparing themselves with other people. They were talking to people. They had connections, right? But now it's really hard. Like sometimes I hear from my friends or even like my clients that the last time that I was outside of my house was like 3 weeks ago.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I can see it. Yeah. Especially, actually, I was thinking about it today in the winter in Toronto too. One could find themselves, now you can just order food that comes to your door, groceries. You really have no incentive to go anywhere if you want to work from home, etc. I mean, that's never really worked for me, but you're right. And then that isolation leads to, social relationships are one of the keys to longevity in life. We've learned that, right?
Absolutely.
So that's what we're kind of talking about. You're a psychotherapist.
Right.
So in terms of practice, is there a difference between being a psychotherapist and a psychologist? No.
Psychologists can diagnose people and can perform assessment. But psychotherapists are who just provide psychotherapy and counseling services.
And the difference between a psychotherapist and a therapist?
Therapist is a general term. But we don't necessarily put it on. So if you're a psychotherapist or if you're a psychologist, you can provide therapy in general. So there's no difference between.
And the difference between a therapist and a life coach, and the difference between a life coach and an influencer.
Okay, go ahead. No. So I think it's really important to talk about those differences. I mean, I definitely agree. So let's talk about being a psychologist and then psychotherapist and then life coach. And to just begin with, like I need to say that I work with all of them. In my personal journey, I worked with psychologists, psychotherapists, and life coaches, and I believe that they're all working together to help people to live a better life. And I'm not really happy with like some of my colleagues that they're like therapists or psychologists, and then they talk about like life coaches that they are coming into the psychology world and they're misdirecting people. I don't believe in that.
You don't?
No.
You like the idea that there's all these life coaches now?
Absolutely. Yeah, because first of all, like when we talk about mental health, we are not necessarily talking about fixing a car, right? We're talking about helping human beings, right? We're so complicated. We have different needs and different capacities to grow. So we need a bunch of different professionals to grow, right? But let's talk about psychologists. Psychologists, they usually go through clinical psychology program, and they learn how to diagnose mental health disorders or mental health conditions, and also help people in terms of overcoming anxiety, depression, suicide, whatever that is. But psychotherapists, they usually work with psychologists. So once people wanted to get a diagnosis, they usually reach out to psychologists. They get a diagnosis and a referral to see a psychotherapist. that is on the team, right? But with life coaches, they don't necessarily have to go through the bachelor's or master's of psychology.
Yeah.
They can be in different industries and become a life coach. There are some trainings, and some of them are very good and very comprehensive, that they can go through it and they can learn how to help people, how to build rapport, and how to make sure that they can understand each other, etc. But so their main focus is not necessarily psychology and mental health. They help people to have better relationships. They help people to have better business. Right?
It's interesting that you started you're a young guy, but you started doing this in Iran. Right. You came about 3 years ago. I remember it's probably changed within even the last 4 or 5 years. I remember early on when we were doing Roqe, so it had been 4 years ago when we started the show. Tina Parsa, who's a psychologist, you might know her. She has a big online presence. She was in New Zealand and in the States, but she was back in Iran when we spoke to her. And we talked about how psychotherapy and therapy in general was still taboo for a lot of Iranians, was still something that they felt like they had to whisper about. They had to kind of go, not tell people who they're talking to, or that they have a professional or they were reticent to get that kind of therapy. Have you noticed a difference from when you were practicing in Iran to here in terms of, do you find Westerners are a lot more open to it, or has that changed just in the intervening years?
I think it's changing even in Iran, but things are getting better, and things are absolutely different here. I think a lot of people actually, they get exposure in terms of like understanding of their mental health, even in high schools and in universities. But we didn't have such a thing back in Iran. So I worked as a full-time counselor at Roqe University for a year. So I had a chance to meet a lot of students, and we had tons of programs to just increase awareness in terms of mental health, suicide, and etc. But we didn't have such a thing back in our universities, right? And it was really sad to see that people are dealing with depression, anxiety,
especially in
PTSD,
Iran.
Especially in Iran.
Economic trouble, all of those things you've talked about. Yeah.
And also shame.
That's probably, is that another one of those Ahmadinejad things where when he declared there was no homosexuality in Iran, is it there's also there's no trauma, there's no anxiety, we don't need psychologists, we don't need psychotherapy.
Oh my God. Like I remember that, like I was like graduated from my bachelor's of studies. I was working in a clinic under supervision, and there was a rule coming out that we have to have more Islamic perspective on psychology. And rather than just having clinical psychologists providing their services, we have to have a different angle, or they all have to get a different training to become certified. And it was...
What does that even mean? You have to inject Quran into...
it didn't make sense because, like, do we have dentists that they have to go through, like, Islamic training to become registered dentist?
You have to get your teeth done in a Muslim way. It's important.
It didn't make sense at all. But yeah, I mean, it was really hard for a lot of families to talk about their mental health, especially if the dad had a problem. It was, and it is hard for men to open up and say, hey, I have bipolar. I can't manage my anger issues. I mean, I'm restless, I'm anxious all the time. It's very hard for them. And they try to mask it, but they do other things that are more harmful to their lives, right? They use drugs, they use alcohol, they're dependent on different dissociative things like, I don't know, social media, pornography, masturbation, having multiple sexual relationships. And that would be more detrimental to their lives rather than just saying that, hey, I think I have anxiety and I need help. But I guess it has something with how we usually learn how to be a man in Iran.
Sorry, so you're saying porn is bad for us? A lot of people are gonna have to change I gotta have to change my ways, apparently. Yeah. It's of course some porn to the extreme can be is I'm imagining the prescription is could be deleterious.
Yeah, but let's say, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
But let's say someone wants to do something that they really love to do, right? Let's say they wanted to have, I don't know, like public speaking, right? But they're so afraid of doing that because it's absolutely anxiety provoking, right? But if they let me put it this way, if they put all of their anxiety aside and just focus on some distractor like porn rather than just working on their
Right, it's an
public speaking,
escape. Yeah.
it's escape.
Yes, I get
and
it,
it wouldn't
yeah.
help them,
Yeah,
right?
I was being facetious, but I do appreciate what you're saying. And frankly, as someone who came out about having pretty bad anxiety like 15 years ago or something like that, when I did so, the takeaway for me, the learning curve was that as soon as you start talking about it, you realize, people open up to you and you realize that so many people are dealing with it. So many people, as soon as I started talking about it, I found like the three closest people in my life were popping Ativan in the morning just to get through the day. And, it's like, oh, okay. So I'm not alone here. So tell me what it means to be practicing psychedelic-assisted therapy.
Sure. Let me first talk about what psychedelic is.
Okay.
I mean, psychedelic was a term that was coined in Canada, in Saskatchewan.
It was?
Yeah.
It's a Canadian thing.
1950 or 1960 something. I think Humphrey Osmond was a psychiatrist who coined the term, who was like having conversation with his friend in the hospital that they were practicing psychedelic-assisted therapy 50 or 60 years ago, right? And then they came up with this word, psych, which in Greek means mind, and delun means manifesting. So they thought that, this drug is mind manifesting. Is not necessarily dissociative. It's not really good for just partying or recreational use. It's how we manifest what we have in our mind, what we have in our unconscious mind, and we bring it up to the conscious mind. And people were using psychedelics way
LSD,
before, like for hundreds of years ago in traditional use of psychedelics. You can find like a lot of indigenous communities that they have used psychedelics as part of their sacrament. But when we talk about psychedelic-assisted therapy, we are not necessarily talking about traditionally using psychedelics or personally using them or even using it for partying, etc. We are talking about using psychedelics in clinical settings. When you have your psychotherapist, a nurse or a medical professional like psychiatrist or physician, and then you have your client that they come into the clinic, they check their blood pressure, they make sure that they are safe to start the therapy.
It's regulated.
Yeah, and then they go through a different types of modalities and different.
Who suggests
journeys.
it? I mean, would you have a client that you're or somebody who's coming to you for psychotherapy and you say, have you tried mushrooms? Is that the way it works?
Yeah, sometimes. Why not? Because like, let's say they're dealing with trauma, right? Something in their life, and especially like in their early childhood, it's getting in their way. They cannot really function well, and they want to just get rid of it, right? So they come to me and they say, hey, like I have trauma, I know, but I don't have time to work on it. And then we both know that if they wanted to go through the whole therapy process, it may take a
years,
year or 2 years,
yeah.
or like even 5 years, like in different modalities is different. And sometimes we just suggest, have you ever thought about psychedelics? And some of them, they even like they know about it and they look that up, and then they come to us for getting psychedelic assisted therapy. But for a lot of people, actually they don't know, and we suggest that, but we don't force anyone, or we don't prescribe it for someone who's not necessarily willing to take it. But it could be a game changer for sure.
Why did you want to get into this lane? I mean, you're a psychotherapist. Where did the psychedelic assisted therapy come in for you?
Sure. I think I was
A good trip? I mean,
yeah.
was
Let-
it? I mean,
yeah, let me give
were
you
you in
some
Peru and you were
let
like,
me-
I've seen God, let's go.
Let me give you some context about my life. So I was brought up with parents who were rigid, religious. They were against any sort of drugs, alcohol, anything, right? You have to be a nice kid. You have to become doctor. And just study, stay away from those people that they use substances, whatever. And funny enough, in the first year of my bachelor's studies, I met a mentor who was working with people who were using substances for years, right? So it was an addiction center back in Tehran, in Maidan Qazvin, and I was working there as part of University of Tehran laboratories, and I was working there, and I realized that there's no difference between us, right? I'm testing them, I'm talking with them. One day they decided to...
Sorry, the difference between us meaning you and the people who are getting counseling for drug use? Is that what you...
Yeah. So we were both rigid about one thing. I was rigid about not using drugs. They were rigid probably about using other sort of, I don't know, like sort of coping mechanism to get help, right? So they never thought about like talking to a counselor when they had depression or anxiety. They had a friend who was using drugs, so they came into this world by a friend or by someone else, right? And I realized that, wow, maybe this rigidity is something that is getting in my way in future. Maybe I'm addicted to some rules, right? So maybe 10 years...
It's an interesting way to put it. Addicted to some rules, as opposed to cautious or somebody who's got strict boundaries. Addicted to some rules.
Yeah.
I like that.
And that addiction was my shame to not explore different words, to not even try alcohol or like drugs.
Because you've been told you'd be a bad person if you do that. Yeah.
You'll be a bad boy.
How did you break out of that?
So part of my, longest story short, part of my PhD studies, I was doing research on RTMS, which is a machine. It's called like repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation. It's a really good way to alleviate some depressive symptoms. It stimulates the brain in the part that is depressed, and it activates and deactivates some other network in the brain, and it helps people to get over depression. I was reading that, and then I realized that, there are some protocols that can help people to overcome depression in 3 weeks. That's really fast. Like if you compare it to using SSRIs or some drugs for 20 years, 3 weeks is really fast.
SSRIs being antidepressant drugs.
Yeah, it's selective serotonin on SSRI.
It's okay, we got it.
Yeah, whatever.
Traditional antidepressant drugs, yeah.
So selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So I realized that, there are some studies on RTMS and some other modalities to treat depression. And in one of them, it was maybe a paragraph talking about ketamine. Ketamine is a psychedelic, is a synthesized psychedelic. And then I realized that, wow, instead of 3 weeks, ketamine can alleviate those symptoms in 4 hours. That's the fastest antidepressant known ever. And then I thought, maybe that would be your wake-up call. Maybe you need to think about some other ways. And at that time, I was very burnt out with all of the research that I was doing at PhD. I mean, I was new to this country. I was working on my English, having tutors 2 times a week. I had also my life, right? Things would come up with my wife. She was also new to the country, etc. Then I thought, you know what? It's time to give up on being a rigid person. I mean, who cares if you're
going to break your addiction to the rules.
Yeah. Who cares if you're a good boy or not? Just do whatever you want. So I convinced myself that you have to give it a shot. And then I received 6 doses of intravenous ketamine, which is the
From
highest.
whom?
From psychiatrists in the clinic,
okay,
right?
okay. As a test, or you were dealing with depression yourself?
No, I didn't actually meet the diagnosis criteria, and I had to talk to 3 different clinics in order to convince one of them that, hey, I'm so
me some
curious.
ketamine. Yeah, okay.
I'm so curious. I know what I'm talking about. Like I've read at least like 10 papers on ketamine, but I want to give it a shot, and you have to help me. And one of them said, you know what? Let's do it. And I remember in my first trip, so when you go to a ketamine clinic, so they check your blood pressure, they make sure that you're fine, and you're ready. You don't have psychosis, active psychosis. You're not seeing or hearing things. So you're ready, you're eligible to receive a psychoactive drug, right? And they check your other symptoms as well, like family history, etc. If you're eligible, if you're a good candidate to receive those 6 doses of ketamine, they put you on 1 session per day for 6 different days, but they don't have to be consecutive. So it would be like Monday, Wednesday, every other day, right?
Okay.
And Friday. So I had it actually in this order. And
how long does each hit of ketamine last in your, like, how long is the high?
You have to block 4 hours for the whole experience, but the trip lasts for around 40 minutes to an hour, max hour.
And I'm guessing, if I speed ahead to the end of the story, that you had a good trip. These really worked for you. Yeah.
In the first trip, I wanted to see what the word would like if I'm not a rigid guy, if I'm more open to new experiences, if I can see the whole world, right? And I was sleeping on the bed in the clinic, and I had an eye mask, and I had headphones on, and I had to listen to an instrumental music. And at the beginning of the trip, like I could feel that.
So why did you have to? They told you to do that, or you wanted to?
That's part of the protocol.
I see.
Because you're sensitive to some voices and hearing things, so they give you some headphones to play instrumental music, and then you have to listen to them and just be focused on what is coming out of your unconscious mind, right? Rather than noises and things that you hear, right? Yeah. And then the room is quiet. You have your nurse or psychiatrist who come and check you and then check all of those monitors to make sure that you're fine. But you cannot really hear or even feel anything. You're just so numb, right? So, and ketamine was used as a horse tranquilizer, right? So it was an anesthetic dissociative medicine. I had my own first trip, and then 20 minutes after they injected the drug, I felt like I'm not on the 5th floor anymore in the clinic. So a voice is telling me that, hey, let me show you the word. You're so consumed with your own word, with your own beliefs. But the word is bigger than that. And that was my rigidity, to think very small, to be focused on what I knew and all of those messages that I've gotten.
And did that stick with you afterwards? You mean you've changed your ways since that? So that in one trip, and the ketamine did it for you?
Yes.
Wow.
Because for the first time, from the 5th floor, I went to the 67th floor in a building in downtown Toronto. And then the voice told me that, you know what? Let me take you to the 183rd floor. And there's no 180 floor building in Toronto, right? And then I realized that, so I'm actually going to see the whole world from a different perspective. And that voice, that guy, I don't know who that was, but that was capable of taking me and showing me the world from different perspective. Longest story short, I didn't know what 183 means for a couple of days until I went to see my psychotherapist, and we were talking about my whole experience and with what happened there. And then I realized that there's no building with 180 floor or whatever in the whole world.
So you retained all the parts of your trip, like you
Yeah, I
afterwards?
could remember
Okay.
part of it, and then once I was out of the trip, I knew my lessons, so I've read from papers that I had to write down or draw something from what I've
So
seen,
what was
right?
the 180 or 183, whatever?
183 was my height in centimeters. The voice was telling me that
Wow.
you're tall enough to see the word, but you were looking down on yourself. You couldn't see the world outside of this box, outside of all of those projections that you've gotten from rigid, traditional culture, family, school.
So have you done it since then?
So I had 6
Why would you
doses.
stop?
So
it's too good.
The thing.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So when you have that window of heightened neuroplasticity, or like way of your brain would make different connection or alter or adapt. So you don't want it to put yourself on higher neuroplasticity all the time because you can get dependent on it.
I want to get to some of the risks of this, but
Sure.
before we go there, you said something interesting about I didn't want to smoke, I didn't want to drink. I went and looked at some of the TED Talks, some of the articles that have been written about how psychedelics, very recent, it's all within the last 10 years, how psychedelics can help with, say, depression or trauma, etc. And then I went through the comments, which are almost universally testimonials from people saying, I did this and it really helped me. A couple of people were saying, when I did this, when I used psychedelics in this kind of therapeutic way, it curbed my addiction to alcohol, or I stopped drinking, or porn addiction. I thought that was so interesting. It seems counterintuitive to be taking a hallucinogenic drug to get off, to be cutting an addiction to other drugs. What is happening there?
Sure. So you remember that I talked about my addiction to be rigid and to just be stuck in some beliefs that I had about myself or about like the whole world, right? Or how it works. So there's a part in brain which is called default mode network. It's a network. It's like imagine different cables that are like bind together. So that default mode network that starts from cingulate cortex to the prefrontal cortex, that is where we do introspection, when we have all of our beliefs about ourselves. So when we ruminate, when we just think about our past or dwell on the past, or think about all the mistakes that we've done or all of the things that we have learned about ourselves, like how you describe Jian inside of your head, that's part of your DMN.
Okay.
And when that network is hyperactivated, you're distracted, you cannot really focus on things. You wanted to get rid of that DMN some of the times because it's terrible. Like it's bothering you all the time. You cannot even like get up and do the work because you're always...
Your mind is racing. That's part of what that is.
Yes.
Middle of the night, you can't sleep. Your mind is racing.
Exactly. And the most common symptoms of depression between like in different studies is rumination that is really making people's life miserable because they cannot get rid of it. Like they can do things for their low mood. They can go out, do exercise and get better, right? They can socialize with people and just come out of their state. But when they stuck in some beliefs or in when the DMN is hyperactivated, they cannot think outside of the box. They think everything is dark. I'm not going to get better. My whole life is not good.
Yeah.
My relationship sucks. So they cannot really think clearly.
So I'm guessing the psychedelic releases that or numbs it. What happens so that you can, so the mind stops racing, so you can see more clearly and you can feel more a sense of ease as opposed to dis-ease?
That's it. That's actually
why don't these? How is
works.
that different from other? I mean, those antidepressant drugs don't do the same thing. Isn't that what Ativan is doing or something?
No, they work on some different serotonergic or dopaminergic systems in the brain, right? So like part of their, like when people get antidepressant and they feel like, oh, I'm getting better, part of their actual effect is related to coming out of the DMN and activating other network in the brain for example, like central executive network, the network that is activated when we are talking, when we are making decisions, when we do things, right? So, but what is really unique about psychedelics is that they can deactivate or hypoactive the whole DMN network, at least for a couple of hours. People come out of it, people detach from the stories that they have about themselves. All of those scripts and narratives that, oh, I'm a bad boy, I'm unlucky, I'm not that good enough, I'm not worthy, all of them are gone, at least for a couple of hours. And they can see themselves from different perspectives.
And how is it that sustains that feeling of being able to see things better? In other words, I get why when on the drug you feel that kind of liberation. Why don't you go back to your old neurotic self right afterwards?
So that's why you need a psychotherapist. And when people have those drugs recreationally, they see things, they hear things, but they cannot really take a meaning out of it. Look, I'm a psychotherapist. I've worked with like clients for like maybe more than 6-7 years, but I couldn't understand what 183 means, right? I had to have another person, my therapist, who make a meaning out of that experience, right? So right now, when we do a psychedelic-assisted therapy in clinics, people come to the clinic, we set a goal for them and together, right? So they come with an intention. So I was abused physically or sexually or emotionally when I was 5, and then I want to get rid of that experience. And instead of telling them that, hey, like we can do something to get rid of that part, you tell them that, hey, I'm going to help you to face that part, that wounded, hurt child that exists in you, right? And it's really hard. Like people just want to get rid of that. People just want to forget about all of that. But that's not possible. So they come, we set a goal, they go on a trip, psychotherapist is there with them. They come out of the trip, they have heard or they've seen things, but it doesn't have meanings for them. And some of the times it has meaning
Is
for
the
them.
therapist, are you guiding them while they're on the trip? No.
You're just
The
sitting
guiding
there.
happens afterwards.
Yes.
Okay.
You're sitting there in the treatment session, and we're writing down the things that they're telling us, or the things that they're yelling sometimes, or they're even singing things, right? So after the trip, they come out of it, they have some different feelings. Oh, I saw my dad was beating me, but I was able to be strong enough.
But how are they seeing their dad? I mean, this all sounds so positively focused on healing. I mean, I've done mushrooms a few times back in the day, but it. I mean, I got really philosophical and thought I was writing really profound poetry which looked like shit the next day or something like that. I mean, I wasn't healing my problems from my youth. So is that something that, or even in the present day, is that something that you're bringing out of the patient or the client while they're, and how are you doing that?
The set and setting is really important. So when they come,
if I'm at a cottage with friends, I'm not necessarily in that vibe.
Exactly. And while you're with your friends that they're not experienced, they're just sitter, or maybe some of them are not sober, so you can really trust them. Or even if it's not a safe place, right? Like you have a lot of noises or a lot of background things, or like people are yelling, whatever. You can't really trust, or your unconscious mind wouldn't let you to go deep enough to understand what is happening there. Why? Because simply you don't have the capacity to take care of it, right? But while you're with a therapist, you've already set a goal for your session. You know what you want to get out of this. So you're triggering, or you're understanding your parts, or your wounded inner child that is there living and telling you that, hey, I need your help. So instead of running away from all of those undigested shame or all of those wounds, we help people to see what is happening inside of their psyche. And when we set the goal, they go on a trip, they listen to music, they have their eye mask, and the whole place is very safe for them. The lighting, everything has tailored for them to be deep enough.
Can you prevent a bad trip? I mean, I've been around enough people who've had a bad trip, and I actually had a bad experience myself once, and it's very traumatizing. It's something you return to. It can be very, very dangerous,
Yes.
right? So how can you ensure that someone isn't going to have a bad trip?
So in the set and in the preparation session, we talk with the client, right? So they come and you can see that right now they have an emotional catharsis, so they're not ready to go really deep and see more. That's enough for them for today, right? They come, if they're not ready to have the trip, we say that, hey, let's just talk about the part. Let's talk about the things that you want to discover today. And once you're ready, you come back and we do it together, like in another session, right? So we measure many different things. So we have different forms. We have to check many different things as a psychotherapist. Also, our nurse would change a lot of different things. So if their blood pressure is very high, if they're already anxious, or if they cannot breathe slowly, we cannot put them on the psychedelic experience.
Let me ask you for just a moment specifically about ADHD, because that's something that comes up it seems like a lot of people are struggling with that these days. How does that intersect with psychedelic-assisted therapy? What can psychedelics or mushrooms do for ADHD?
So there are a couple of research that they went over, like how psychedelics can help people with ADHD, and they compared psychedelics with like other medications for ADHD. So they found like some results, some hopes about using psychedelics, but that's the thing. A lot of people that they think that they have ADHD, when they get diagnosis, they don't really have that. And by diagnosis, I mean not an interview with a psychiatrist or psychologist. I mean a proper assessment that takes 2 or 3 days, and it costs like about $2,000 or $3,000. And we do this as part of my practicum for becoming a psychologist. So when they get through the whole assessment, they realize that, I have a lot of ADHD-like symptoms. I'm distracted all the time. I'm anxious. I'm restless. I'm impulsive, but not because of ADHD, but because of their trauma and the things that they haven't really faced yet. The undigested shame.
ADHD is an outgrowth, or symptoms like that is an outgrowth of the trauma again.
Yeah.
And that.
Maybe they can see it on the surface level, but they don't know why they're distracted, why they're always impulsive. Because of something in their unconscious mind is bothering them. So it doesn't let them to sit and just do the work, right? So there are some impairments in the cognitive, in the central executive network, but not because of their ADHD or not because of other reasons that they contribute to ADHD, but because one of the inner child of one of their parts in their system is very hurt and wounded and need help.
Something that was interesting for me is finding out that, I mean, you've only been in Canada for 3 years, but your English is excellent. But you actually put your confidence in speaking English down to psychedelic use as well, right? Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, if I didn't have that trip or that experience, I wouldn't be here, Jian. Maybe 10 years from now, maybe.
Because why? What did the ketamine do that would lead you to be here?
So it gave me clarity. Hey, you want something? You found psychedelic very interesting and you think people should know it? Go and talk about it. So there was a voice out of one of my trips that when I was going and seeing the world, I was scared in part of it. And then the voice told me that, hey, just go ahead, we'll guide you. Show up, we'll take care of you. And I have anxiety around my English because I just came here to this country like 3 years ago. Yes, I have my tutors, like I actively working on improving my English. But being on a podcast and speaking about like some scientific terms in English, would be something that before having that trip, I would probably think about like maybe having it when I'm 40 years old, not when I'm 31, right?
When you were tripping, was the voice that you heard my voice? Come on to the Roqe podcast.
Yeah, I'm waiting for you in Toronto. Oh my God.
I'm waiting for you. Yeah. Well, I mean, that I hope you paid a lot for that. So obviously, I'm guessing there's differences between ketamine, mushrooms, different kinds of psychedelics, ayahuasca. I mean, so walk me through what's your go-to? Is there a basic drug that you go, this is where I'm going to start this person?
Sure. Like in Canada, in Ontario specifically, we cannot prescribe. I mean, our physician, they cannot prescribe MDMA, LSD, magic mushrooms for patients or for clients to get a psychedelic-assisted therapy with that. We can only prescribe ketamine-assisted therapy. And why? There are many reasons for.
So we're not talking about mushrooms at all this whole time? We're just talking about ketamine?
Yes and no. So with psychedelics, psychedelic is a general term, right? There's different classifications for psychedelics, but let's say we have classic psychedelics like magic mushrooms, ayahuasca, DMT, and we have psychedelic adjacent like ketamine or some other drugs, right? So with ketamine, the trip only lasts for 40 minutes to an hour. So that's really manageable in clinical settings. But with mushrooms, it takes 4 to 6 hours. So that's different, right? So you cannot have a therapist sitting with the client for like 8 or 10 hours straight for them to
a
to
good
go on a
therapist,
trip.
maybe.
But
a dedicated one, not
patient
you,
one.
apparently.
No, I'm not that patient. So for someone to stay with the client for like 8 to 10 hours and then integrate all of
Not realistic.
It's not realistic, but it can be really helpful for some people that they are dealing with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and sometimes ketamine is not really good for them. So we have to make sure that the drug or the psychedelic assisted therapy in general is suitable for them. But let's put it this way. Out of 100% of people that they are on any sort of antidepressants, 45% of them, they don't get any results out of trying the first one and the second one. So they have treatment-resistant depression. They have to go through either electroshock therapy, RTMS, which I explained earlier, or psychedelic-assisted therapy, or just doing nothing. And then they get worse and worse, right? So we need to define what is good or what is working with psychedelics, what is not working. So it's not really good for everyone per se, right? So people that they are dependent on alcohol, there are some contraindication with like using ketamine for people that are using alcohol, but maybe they go on an ayahuasca trip or an iboga trip, and that could really change their
So
work.
you can't assist with ayahuasca, at least in your clinic, but do you believe in it? Do you think it's also something that's that people should try if they need to?
I mean, it depends if they don't have enough. I mean, if they're not seeing things or hearing things, or if they're not dealing with like psychosis or dependent on alcohol, or they're not mixing other drugs. Yes, that could be really good for them if they do it with a sitter, with a shaman, or in a good setting, right? If it's controlled, definitely, why not?
How do you respond to the criticism that there hasn't been enough time to really see what the long-term effects of these drugs would be? In other words, because it's a relatively new field, we don't know what kind of effects it's going to have psychologically, how it's going to affect your brain 20, 30 years down the road. What's your response to that?
So there's a research published in The Lancet, is a very famous journal. And then the researchers try to compare harms from different drugs: alcohol, LSD, ketamine, mushroom, tobacco, cannabis, all sort of drugs, right? And the harm score was calculated by the injuries, mortality, the causes of pain or negative things in their relationship, crime, etc. And what they saw, I mean, I wish I had that graph with me, but when you look at the bar table, you see that alcohol got 72 from the harm score from 0 to 100, and it's very harmful. It was on top of the list. Ketamine got 15, LSD mushroom got 5 and 6. But funny enough, LSD
only has a 5% harm rate.
Yeah, and LSD and mushrooms are illegal in many countries.
Yeah.
And alcohol is not.
I wouldn't equate them necessarily. Would I? Would you put those two together, mushrooms and LSD?
No.
LSD is a much more I mean, I don't know, but in my experience, LSD is a much more has a lot more implications to using it than mushrooms in terms of dangers.
Definitely. I mean, the dosage is important too, right? With mushrooms, like it's really hard to digest more than 3 or 4 grams, right? And that's why, but with LSD, it would be different, right? But here's the thing. So when you look at all of those numbers, you'll see that alcohol, that almost everyone can have access to that, like even including people in Iran, right? It's on top of the list, and no one is talking about it. Like governments are making a lot of benefits out of selling those alcohols, or taxing them. But with mushrooms, LSD, and ketamine is a total different thing. Why? Because people, like there was a revolution in using psychedelics back in 1950 to 1970s. So people were getting all of those trips or using all of those psychedelic-assisted therapy, and people were getting wiser, and people wanted to have different things like freedom, like LGBTQ communities wanted to have their own
and Big Brother didn't like that.
Yeah, but so Reagan wanted to put that on the Schedule 1 and ban all of the drugs. And they even closed some labs in universities that they were doing research on psychedelic-assisted therapy. But with alcohol, it's totally different. Why? Because people use alcohol to be less harmful, to be more dissociated. They are not necessarily fighting for their rights when they are drunk, right? So they do other things. They're just enjoying their time. But if they're wiser, if they have more needs from government, the case would be really different.
Are any of the drugs that you do subscribe to in terms of being useful, would you classify any of them as addictive?
Ketamine has a high potential to...
You want it again once you've had a shot?
Yes and no.
I know, for example, I haven't done heroin, but I have had friends who have, or I've known people who have, I should say, and one person described, she told me, she just said, man, it's so good, in her experience anyway, that she just wanted to do it again right away, which is terrifying, because heroin doesn't usually end up in a good place after a while. So where do these drugs rank in that sort of score?
So heroin was the second one, and I think methamphetamine, crack, cocaine, very, very like the fourth and fifth. But here's the thing. So methamphetamine.
What's number one?
Alcohol.
Oh, alcohol's the most addictive.
Yeah. No. The most harmful.
Most
drug.
harmful.
Yeah.
Alcohol's more harmful than heroin.
Yes.
That's crazy.
In that study, because it's more accessible.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not illegal.
Yeah. I see. So it's having the most harm on society per capita. Well, that's different. Oh, yeah. But we're not saying a shot of whiskey is the same as
No,
doing
not
it.
at all.
Yeah,
Not at all. But methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, they activate different part of the brain, which we call it the reward system in the brain. So that's where addiction comes. Like people get stuck into using them because they get reward out of it. So let's say, there are different scales on how we get pleasure out of doing things. So let's say having a really good meal or a good steak in I don't know, like in your favorite place gives you like 5 or 6 points of pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Having a good sex would give you like maybe 15 to 20.
Mm-hmm.
And methamphetamine would give you 97 out of 100.
Wow.
That's why it's so addictive.
Yeah.
But it's not the case with ketamine or LSD.
5 times better than good sex, huh?
Yeah.
Jeez.
So, and you have to consider the compound effect as well, right? It's more than that. But let's put it this way. So with ketamine, you wanted to have that experience again and again. But they the medical professional that they look after their doses and make sure that you're not getting addicted to it, right?
Yes.
And that's why we have like some gaps between the sessions. But with methamphetamine and heroin, people can be on it all the time.
It's interesting how the uses of drugs shapeshift over time. We did an episode on opium, and our guest was saying that, and particularly in Iran, because it was used quite widely, as you may know, that until about 150 years ago, it was used medicinally, including to kids. You know, it was like the kids acting up a little bit. You give them some opium. You got a little, somebody's feeling a little sick. Let's deal with it with it. And it was only until the late 19th century in Iran and then beyond that it was like, oh, bingo, this can be a recreational drug, which is what it became, and which is true for a lot of other, alcohol and things that were used medicinally. In some cases, we're seeing the transition from things that are used recreationally into usage that can be rehabilitating, for example, psychologically.
Yeah, but if you look at the history of psychedelics, they were part of their sacrament of indigenous people. They were actually doing the healing work, but in a different context, right? So instead of having their like instrumental music in their ears, so they had their own instruments. They played music. They had their own dances, right? But simply like it's really hard for people to just refer them to go to some like indigenous churches to have all of those experiences, and we have to respect their own way of doing it and learn from them and bring it to clinical settings that people can come and in 3 hours they can get their ketamine session, right?
Back to where we started, and the nice boy who was addicted to rules in Tehran with a conservative family. Where's your family at on what you're doing? I mean, if they're very dedicated to no drugs, no a very straight-laced kind of religious life or something, how do they feel about their son being the spokesperson for a psychedelic-assisted therapy?
I think I should ask them after they watch this episode.
They don't know what you do.
No, I'm doing fine. Like I'm
Is this your real name? Because they're gonna find out.
Yeah, I'm doing research, Mom. That's it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I'm doing the work.
I feel I'm worried for you. I mean, they're gonna, you're gonna get an angry call from Tehran.
Yeah, maybe.
And you also, back to the beginning of this talk, you said, well, good luck with that, by the way. Persian parents, that's not easy. Let us know if you need if we can crowdsource this and talk about how great you're doing. Or maybe your clients can give some testimonials for your parents. I'm sure they're very proud of you. They'll probably know that you're doing great work. It's coming from an important place. One of the first things you said in this conversation was, this is going to change mental health care for good, for sure.
Yeah.
You're really sure of this, even though it's relatively new to you.
Yeah.
because you're seeing the results? What makes you so sure?
Not necessarily. First, like yes, I have like first-hand experience, and nothing was like even close to my journey, right? Like my psychedelic journey. So overall, like I think in the last 10 years, I have had more than 370 hours of psychotherapy for myself with 4 different psychotherapists. 2 of them were like big names in Iran, right? So I found the best of the best. 5 years of psychoanalysis, 2 years of group psychoanalysis for myself. And then coming here, 3 different psychotherapists. But after the first session, when I came out of the trip, I realized that, like, I'm at peace with this guy. Mm-hmm. But none of those
this sessions, guy being yourself.
Yeah. None of those sessions could really help me to feel that way, or even to let me to be at peace with myself or with my being. Because yes, like they could help me to maybe move my energy from the default mode network to the central executive network, or even like learning how to be more productive, managing my mood, emotions, etc. But none of them could just open a window for me to look at my whole being and the whole universe from a different angle.
It's tremendous validation. It's a tremendous testimonial you're giving right now to this, and you've done good work for the psychedelics business today. I really appreciate this conversation. I mean, I think it's it's interesting that it is no longer even Googling this. I think 10 years ago there was a bit of a ooh, really psychedelic, or like it seemed like avant-garde or super progressive, Rochanfect to be thinking. It seems like it's considered accepted health-based wisdom now to be using psychedelics for these purposes, right?
Absolutely. If it's not for recreational use, because people can have those bad trips and it's not really good experience at all. Like I've had friends or clients that they've had one of those bad experiences.
There are risks associated with this.
Yeah,
there are risks.
Absolutely.
And there are risks to probably almost any drug use or vaccine or whatever, right?
Even like I don't know, vitamin C or vitamin D, right? So there's like always risk about like overdosing yourself, even with like some simple medications, right? So there's a part about side effects of even vitamin D if you read the label, right? So I'm not gonna like insist on vitamin D or whatever, but I'm just giving you example, like even when people like use those drugs for when they are not really doing well, like when something in their relationship went wrong, or when they feel bad and they don't have any other option, so they wanted to have a better mood or whatever, they use those drugs without a sitter, without a proper setting, they can really harm themselves. Yeah. But if they go to a therapist or even like ask a professional to use psychedelic-assisted therapy, then they're in good hands, right? So that's my last point, to just remember that like the same thing can have like many very different results for you.
Very grateful for you coming in. You recently had a birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for all your wisdom, and thanks for being part of the Sun Roqe.
It's my pleasure.
Merci. All right, that's it for this edition of Roqe. Thank you so much to Anisa and to Mohammad. If you have any thoughts on this or comments, obviously you can post on any of our social media platforms about it, or send us a note at producer@roqemedia.com, producer@roqemedia.com, where our producer, or one of them, will get back to you, and where we can potentially read your letters next week about psychedelics, about psilocybin, about new approaches to mental health. We love to hear from you. This is full time for Roqe for today. Thanks to the amazing team who put this show together. That would be Super Parisa, Sabi Roham, Tina, the photo and video queen, and Ghazaleh, the OG. Special thanks as well to Smart Pega, Talented Anahita, Solid Samin, and of course Methodical Kaveh. Remember, you can catch Roqe on any or all of our platforms, and you can also support us by sharing our content and subscribing. Thank you to all of you out there for supporting us and doing so. If you haven't done so already, it's never too late. Find me on Instagram at Jian Gomeshi. Find Roqe Media on Instagram at Roqe Media, where we make a lot of our announcements, so you want to follow us there. We're also on Facebook and Twitter and other places, or X or whatever it's called now. And as ever, this is the most important part, as my Uncle Behrang would tell me. Are you ready? Mizun Bashim.